Hey guys, welcome to livemorenow.net. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. I've got a couple of Photoshop kind of tips and tricks that I've been using lately. I've been doing a few more headshots and portraits just lately, so this tip is really, or these tips have really come in handy. I would call them maybe more beginner, maybe intermediate tips. I'm not a huge Photoshop expert at all. I love it. It's amazing. I use a very small percentage of the tools, but I'm starting to kind of gain a little more experience. And these couple of tips and tricks really have allowed me to get outside of Lightroom and do a few things that are just much easier, much more powerful. So let's jump into the computer and let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we are. We're in Lightroom. We're going to start here in Lightroom. So I've got a little image here of a kind of a portrait. It's cropped from another picture that I did a few years ago, but I think it's kind of a good example to show the couple of tips that I'd like to show you in Photoshop. So Lightroom is great. I've been using Lightroom for quite a while, and it's great for organizing photos and really doing a lot of basic edits and color correction, all that kind of stuff. It's fantastic, but there's just a few things where I think it kind of falls apart a little bit, or isn't very adept at kind of advanced editing. And one is using the clone stamp or the clone brush or the healing brush. It works for a few things. It's definitely useful for getting rid of a small or one or two things here and there. Maybe this little whatever this is on her face. It works, and it works good, but it's kind of slow, and it's not something I like to use for a bunch of stuff, just because it takes a while, and it's just not really made for that, I don't think. It's not that efficient. So that's really where Photoshop comes in. Now Photoshop I'm not a Photoshop guy. I'm not really super adept at Photoshop. I've been using it very lightly here and there, but there's a couple of things that I've kind of come across over the last little while that can really help take your portrait specifically to kind of the next level. So this, I think, we'd agree, it's a pretty girl. Nice. It's a nice shot on its own. It's good, right? I'd have no problem kind of showing this to someone. But there's a few things right out of the gate that I would probably like to do if I wanted to kind of, like I said, take it to the next level. That'd be clean up her hair a little bit, some of the flyaways, and maybe just reduce a little bit of this the shininess on her face. Now that there's ways that you can do it in Lightroom. The hair, I don't know about. I've used a single flyaway here and there. I've used the clone stamp to kind of draw each one, but it's just painful and slow. And I got a pretty fast computer. But the face shininess is again, you can take care of. But I think this is where Photoshop really shines. So let me show you what the two kind of ways that I've learned to take care of this in Photoshop. So let's open up Photoshop. We'll edit this photo in Photoshop. And let's zoom in a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I always just create a copy of my background just in case. And let's start with a new clean layer on top of that. So we're going to actually use the pen tool to take care of some of this flyaway hair stuff. And this is a really cool tip that I found from Aaron Nace over at Flern. The guy's a Photoshop wizard, and he's incredibly creative. And this was a very, very helpful tip. I've really just started using it recently, and it helps a lot. So let's grab the pen tool. And on our new layer, basically what we're going to do is trace around kind of her hairline, or where you want her hairline to be, and then use the clone stamp, select that area and use the clone stamp to kind of clone out that. So let me just kind of show you. It's probably easier than me trying to explain it. So we're going to start using the pen tool. We're going to kind of draw a profile around her hair here. We're going to kind of stick to a line, but we can play around with it after the fact. So let's do this. We'll continue around. This will be a good spot to show. And we'll go down to here. And I'm going to do this kind of rough, but you'll get the idea. Then we'll kind of finish it around. Continuing around here. There we go. There's our circle. So we got a complete selection here. Now if we right click and make selection, now I have this already set up. You may have 0 already, but I'm going to put a little feather here of a half a pixel, anti-alias, and we'll click OK. So there's our selection. Now we can hide this with Command H if it's a little bit in your way or it's kind of messaged up a little bit, but I'm just going to leave it on just so we can see what we're doing a little bit more here. So the key here is the next step is we're going to use our clone stamp tool, right? So we got our clone stamp. I'm going to bring it down just a hair, and let's get our brush to, it's okay, a nice soft brush. Now we're going to use Alt or Option here, Option on the Mac, and we're going to pick an area above where the hair is to sample from, and then we draw down, and you can see as I'm cloning down, it's not going to touch her hair, it's not going into her hair, because this selection is the border. It's only going to clone within this selection. So I can really, once I get my selection, I can just draw kind of violently. Whoops, I got some of her hair on the other side of that selection. But I can just kind of start drawing over this or cloning over this with not having to worry about getting too deep into the hair. Like you could, this is a classic example where you could probably even use the white paintbrush, right? A paintbrush tool here, because I got a seamless backdrop here. And you could use the same idea, but then you always got to worry about kind of getting into her hair with that paintbrush. But using this clone stamp, we can just keep drawing, painting basically over the area. We'll keep kind of changing the what we're sampling, just so it's picking up the colors and shades near that area that we're going to clone over. And that's it. So that gets rid of that flyaway. So now if I deselect, if I Command H and get rid of that, you can see that that gave us a nice clean line, right? Now, this is kind of a rough job, but you get the idea. Now, there's going to be a point where this is going to look a little artificial, right? It's going to look kind of like a helmet, or like you cut her out of a background or something. So there's a few ways we can kind of go back in and fill the areas a little bit. So if I do Command D to deselect that area, so now I'm back to a full area. Let's start maybe a new layer. We can use the clone stamp tool again and maybe just zoom in a little bit here. And let's say we wanted to fill in some of these kind of ghosted areas, or some of the areas that you can see the background through. We can use the main clone stamp on the whole image. We'll sample from her hair, and we can actually clone in some of that hair and fill back into that area. Again, bad example because I went over. Probably use a smaller brush here, but so we can kind of just fill in some of these spots a little bit as we see fit around here, right? The other cool thing to do is, let's say we're good, right? But you do want a little bit of flyaways generally, just because it looks a little more natural, right? So we can actually use, again, the brush tool, and we can actually, we'll get a really hard brush, and we'll get down to about 3 or 4 pixels. It's about the size of a hair, let's say 3 pixels. Now I'm going to just crank my opacity and flow up a bit here. And we can actually literally just draw in hairs. See, as I sample, it's probably the bad color, but if I sample her hair color here and then just kind of draw them in a little bit, see, no, that looks stupid, but you get the idea. You're literally just painting in some new hairs into the areas that look a little too fake or helmety, and you can make it a little more natural looking instead of that kind of really hard cut edge. So again, I'm doing this really quick, but again, you get the idea. I'd take a little more time to do this if I was actually going to show somebody or give this to somebody. But you can paint some of those hairs back in, so when you're zooming out a little bit, it does start to look a little more natural, right? So if we go back, there's the flyaways, and there's the pen tool to get that nice clean edge, and then there's adding a few hairs and some clone stamping of her hair back in. Again, I would probably take 5 times longer to do this, but I just wanted to show you the technique, and you can kind of play around with it yourself. So the other quick little tip I'd like to show you, and you may know this, and there's probably 20 different ways of doing this, but again, I found a guy on a quick little tutorial on YouTube that showed this tip on how to kind of calm down or tone down some of these bright little highlights. Some people have, oily skin, or maybe, your lighting was a little bit hot and harsh, and you're going to have some highlights here and there. So we use the brush tool. So I created a new layer. The key here is, instead of under normal, which is what I probably should have been on when I was doing the other stuff, but we actually go to darken on that new layer, and we'll crank this opacity and our flow down a little bit here, and we just use the brush tool. So with this darken layer and using the brush tool, so we use the brush tool, and let's go a little bit bigger, and we'll go quite a bit softer. All right. Now again, using our eyedropper, we can select the color, and with this darken selected on the mode for this layer, we can just kind of paint and brush over with a low opacity, and you know, we don't want to put too much quote-unquote paint down here, but we can just select the colors near, see, you know, whether I want a little bit lighter color or a little bit darker color, wherever, and just kind of blend it in together and just paint over these areas and just take some of the shine out. It'll be a little more noticeable on the cheek here. Let's take this color and we'll just kind of paint over it. We'll take a little bit of this color, a little bit of this color here. All right, maybe over here. Take some of this pink and blend that in a bit. Go back over here. So it's just a nice, simple way of doing some kind of finishing retouches to get some of those shiny spots out. Now I think that looks pretty good. That was pretty quick, but again, you can spend some more time and make sure your blending is nice and doesn't look too fake. But if we see by just turning that layer off, that just took those highlights right out of there. I think it just looks much cleaner. So those are the 2 quick tips that I wanted to show you today. These have really helped me with my portrait stuff, with my portrait photos, kind of taking them to the next level. I think I've been happy with my photos for the most part all along, but the hair really was the big one. I hated going in there and messing about on every single hair. You know, Photoshop, you know, not to digress too much, but Photoshop is great with the, you know, the spot healing brush and the regular healing brush for like single hairs, right? To kind of draw out these single hairs maybe that are on her face. Like that's good, it's good, that's bad, but you get the idea. It's great for single hairs. I can just kind of brush these single things up. But when you got to these clumps and these flyaways, it just took forever and it was a pain in the butt. So that combination of pen tool and clone stamping tool, and then a little bit of brushing in individual hairs after the fact has really saved me a lot of time, and I think made my portraits in the end look a lot cleaner. So hopefully those tips are useful for you. Good luck with your portraits. Thanks for visiting livemorenow.net.